For everyone out there that's listening in on the webinar, a couple of things that we want to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about who Ribbon is, just a quick brief introduction on who we are in case you're not entirely sure. But then we want to focus in on really the content that we have planned for you. We'll talk a little bit about some of the market trends, what we're seeing, what the industry is seeing around 5G deployments of smartphones, and really start getting into how does all of that 5G rollout really affect your voice network, and when is voice over new radio going to be coming, and how will that IMS core VoLTE play within those 5G networks. I think that's what everybody is very interested in seeing, kind of what do they need to understand relative to that. An important component of that is what we deem are three kind of key pillars of how VoLTE analytics will play in the world today, as well as when you move into more of a 5G core type of network. Then we'll also kind of round out with some recommendations, and then just a summary and get into some questions and answer as time's available for everyone. So why don't we just go ahead and jump into it. Real quickly about Ribbon. We came about through a merger of GenBand and Sonus Networks back in 2017. Right now we're headquartered in the U.S., primary headquarters are in Westford, but we have offices in Raleigh in North Carolina, Dallas, Texas, Ottawa, over in EMEA, and we're worldwide across the globe. We really focus on a couple of key specific areas for our service provider and enterprise customer, that being with the optical transport, packet networking that we acquired from ECI Telecom, which just closed this year. But we also have a heavy footprint in the enterprise edge, service provider networks, focusing on things like security, as well as what we're here to talk to you today about as analytics. We're about 4,000 employees globally and a combined revenue of approximately $900 million. You can go off and get a lot more information on who Ribbon is at ribboncommunications.com. Okay, so let's start to jump into it. So as I mentioned earlier, I did want to talk a little bit about just kind of the state of the market, where things are. And I think kind of a good way to put in perspective where is, especially in mobile networks, is how many people have smartphones in the world. There's a lot of people in the world, and there's, through the industry, Statista, approximately 3.5 billion smartphone users in the world today. And so if you look at that in aggregate across all the people across the entire globe, it's about 45%. So there's still a big uptick, and we're seeing a huge market influx. Certainly with this COVID pandemic that's happening, we're seeing a lot more usage on our smartphones, home offices, and I think that's just going to, obviously it's going to continue to grow. And if you kind of look at where this number was back in 2016, there was only 2.5 billion. So effectively, these numbers are 2019, effectively 1 billion users in roughly 3 years. So there's going to be constant growth across that. And predominantly with these 3.5 billion phones, they're not 5G enabled. So we're just going to start to see that influx of those 5G phones start to come out. If you look at 5G from a rollout standpoint, last I checked, and according to the GSMA in May of this year, there's approximately 73 commercial launches that have gone up, and these are really kind of focused on the data side, and focused on getting traction on high-speed internet access throughout the various regions. And if you look at kind of the global map that's behind the data, those are some of the deployment, the commercial availability of deployments that have gone on. you have these small cells, so you don't have the broad coverage enabled with 5G. So there's going to be a number of different sites that need to be lit up to carry the 5G traffic. And so we're starting to see more and more in that. But even in the next 5 years, if you look at the total mobile global connections, 5G will only consume 20% of that. That's what the analysts are expecting. So you still have a huge amount of 4G connections that are, still going to be maintained, even going down to circuit switch networks, which are going to be around for a period of time in maybe some underdeveloped countries. And so we're starting to see, while there's growth in 5G, we're still seeing, the 4G core networks are still there. 3G circuit switch are still there, and are going to continue to grow as we move forward. So if we look at just the growth in smartphones, kind of going back to that, I think this is where we're going to see the inflection point. But Chip, as we look at these growth of smartphones that come in, and we're going to start maybe seeing the inflection point right now, I think the real question that a lot of people are saying, well, are those phones going to support voice over new radio, basically for 5G networks? Do you care to comment on kind of what you're seeing relative to that?
Sure. I think in general, we're going to relive the LTE to VoLTE transition. So here, the 5G to 5G with voice will be a similar pattern. And the rationale is obviously everyone's looking to get to market as quickly as possible with 5G, which means that they deployed and seeded the market with 5G phones that were really looking for fixed wireless based solutions initially, and then certainly having a mobile device that has 5G data, but worrying a little less about getting everything in place for voice over the new radio or 5G voice. And essentially what that means is we'll be waiting probably to next year where we start really seeing in earnest 5G voice phones.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, if you just take the numbers, you have 3.5 billion smartphone users today. If you take the 2020 number, that's 413 million subs that might have 5G enabled phones. So you still have to worry about the rest of the population, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add on that really it's the silicon vendors too, right? Everything's driving behind them. So, they're actually putting out, and there has been some slips, right? They may have done some, routine, initial testing on 5G voice, in a closed network or something along those lines, but they really haven't moved very far. And if you look at, like, say, Qualcomm, their third chip is probably the one that will support 5G voice. So.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, you're still going to see why VoLTE is still going strong. I mean, so some of the data, Chip, that I was able to gain is there's basically this year about $3.7 billion that are being invested in the VoLTE market, and as you continue out to 2025, that's going to really jump about 56%. So while people are making a lot of investments in 5G today, they're still making even more investments, the way I see it, in the VoLTE market. So I don't know. What do you think is really kind of driving that underlying growth of the VoLTE market? What are kind of maybe some of the key things that are driving that?
Yeah, so obviously it started out with delivering a better experience to the end user. Certainly having HD voice capabilities, more bandwidth to throw at the solution, better encoders and so forth, allow us to enable that. So that's always been there with VoLTE. But looking at the growth pattern, if you take a worldwide view, we're still not at the point where we have VoLTE in every country that you're going to, which means you're always kind of kicking back to 3G. And then if you kind of drill one layer down, you're seeing that the VoLTE coverage, within a carrier, within a country, may not be complete as well. So they're going to address their large markets initially, and then they'll work out, towards, the outskirts and the rural areas. So you'll always have, that continued growth of VoLTE, as they're looking to penetrate across the board and build out that level of coverage there. And then, as more phones are also, being upgraded, those new phones, will obviously in worldwide will also support VoLTE as well, and then you'll have more capacity requirements there. So, that trend will continue on for quite some time. And then finally, when you're looking at it, you've built out this IMS core with this great vision of voice and video and rich communication services, right? So those items are actually finally being realized as well, right? We're seeing a lot of pull in terms of like being able to deploy, voice over Wi-Fi in the homes. And, that will be useful even for, for 5G, where, your coverage may not completely penetrate, buildings and so forth. So you'll want to rely on these types of features. And of course, RCS has its own advantages as well in terms of maybe not necessarily being in your network, but being able to, phone all the way back home and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if we kind of look at this, VoLTE still going strong, being able to get the insights and understand what's happening in that VoLTE network, I think is always going to be a very critical piece of the puzzle, especially when you eventually want to get, to voice over new radio, voice over 5G. So Chip, maybe you can comment a little bit of like why do you think that the VoLTE analytics is going to be a critical step, to help people bridge that gap and continue to move forward into some of the newer technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly there's a number of 5G issues that we have to kind of deal with as it's being rolled out. So first and foremost, as I said before, you'll look to address, large markets only and really have like, targeted coverage there. So with that, there'll be a lot of space where you're not able to actually implement, 5G voice. And you'll have to end up looking to fallback, right? So they've introduced the concept right up front, where supporting EPS fallback to be able to handle that. So what that means on the VoLTE side is that you need to have more visibility into working. So maybe in the early days you had the visibility of understanding circuit switch fallback or SRVCC to be able to handle various 4G to 3G scenarios. You'll now need to actually support that, looking towards a 5G perspective. That's one aspect. Another one is as you're continuing with these smartphone rollouts that are enabled with 5G in varying forms, you'll need better visibility and understanding on supporting those devices. So there'll be a continued growth, as you were rightly outlining earlier, Walter, on the smartphone introduction in the market. With that, you need a certain level of rich visibility on your VoLTE network to be able to debug all those scenarios. Each one of them, may have different implementations, configurations that are deployed, various underlying software stacks and chips and so forth. So you have to manage that. And finally, kind of keying in on the smaller cells, if you look at VoLTE itself, right, you may have focused on the IMS core, but then that soon moved, to look not only on that, but also the access network and the core network, and being able to debug at that level. And that was the only way that you could actually ensure that your VoLTE services were being delivered with the right quality. As you're rolling out 5G, all of those additional cells will be added to the network. They're much smaller as well, so you'll want to gain that additional level of visibility, the ability essentially to do, a cellular analysis, right, like down to that level. So those are the things that are going to be required on the VoLTE side, both for, the initial rollout where you're actually doing a fallback scenario, but even as voice over new radio or voice over 5G is running, you'll also need that visibility, as they continue to coexist. So at the end of the day, it really is that, the 3GPP standards have decided that IMS core will, remain intact as all of the new capabilities are coming in for 5G, be it on the new radio side or even building out the 5G core, right, where that has its own set of complexities. Obviously this discussion isn't really not getting into that, but as they're building out RESTful APIs and more cloud native based approach and kind of, breaking down the functions, all of that adds a lot of complexity and churn into the core network. They decided to leave IMS kind of alone for now, initially. So you'll want to have that stable base, within your, your VoLTE solution today, and you'll want to invest in that as you move forward towards even adding 5G voice there.
Right, and having all those kind of underlying analytics and views of how that IMS core is already functioning as you make that migration will just make that transition even more seamless as from a performance and standardization perspective. So, real important, I think, to highlight those types of issues. So I think what Lance, just kind of rounding this section out of some of the marketplace, I think we want to bring out a poll question, get some feedback from the audience.
Sure, no problem, Walter. Yeah, that poll question should be popping up on your screen now. Question is, what is your 5G voice and data plans in the next 2 years? You have a couple choices there, rolling out 5G data plus EPS fallback for voice. Second choice, rolling out 5G data plus 5G voice. And then, of course, nothing planned there. So we'll give this a few minutes till we get some votes rolling in, and I see a few trickling in now. So yeah.
Yeah, so we're getting a couple of, Chip, as we're kind of waiting for maybe some of the results to play out, what is your guess in terms of what the audience is going to vote on?
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect, just given the options that 5G is outlined for the, introduction, which includes, the ability to deploy in a non-standalone mode or standalone mode, the bulk of the service providers that may be delivering on voice effectively want to, continue to leverage their mobile network that exists. So they probably will leverage VoLTE, and they'll look for an EPS fallback like solution. There are certainly some cases where people are rolling out standalone 5G, and maybe they're actually looking to embrace that, but I think it's a bit it's a bit early. I would say.
Right. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. I'll also be interested to see who is not planning on rolling out 5G right now from the audience. And I think we may have some enterprise level customers, or maybe customers not ready for that yet, but it'll be interesting to see what we have. So Lance, maybe why don't we go ahead and can you push out the results? Interesting. Yeah. So very interesting. We have 38% with the 5G data and the EPS fallback. 44 is nothing planned, but we had 19 that are pushing all the cards in, 5G data and 5G voice. So I think that's not necessarily what I expected. I don't know about you, Chip, but maybe I expected a little bit more on EPS fallback, but maybe having nothing planned, or maybe it's not known. I think that was kind of a heavy one. And 20% on, kind of pushing all the cards in on the data side and the voice side is very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think just given the amount of phone support that backs that, but I think you can look at it from a market by market perspective, where they've made deals, right? I mean, Apple certainly can penetrate a market and seed a market for something. Obviously, they're not one that's actually pushing on the 5G voice side, but you can have a single vendor that's doing that. So
absolutely, yeah. So, well, for the audience, thank you for participating in the quick poll. Why don't we go ahead and move forward? Good information and data. Okay, so what we wanted to really talk about was really getting into the analytics piece that a lot of you will be facing, as you make your venture into 5G and trying to figure out what are we going to, how we're going to manage the VoLTE core, or if you haven't implemented VoLTE yet, what are the kind of the issues that you need to really worry about? Just some of the things that we hear from our customers, our VoLTE-based customers, the requests that we get into, okay, I'm putting in your analytics, but how do I see my subscribers, voice performance? Is the issue, on the control plane or user plane more, it's more an LTE type of question. How does VoLTE compare with some of the over-the-top applications like, WhatsApp and, as Facebook pushes their solutions out and all these social media vendors are starting to get in the voice game, we're going to see more of those types of applications. So how does VoLTE compare with that? Are your VIPs getting that right level of service? How do you ensure, the premium voice quality for them? So there's all these different questions that operators need to understand and be able to get insights across really a massive network that spans, that spans, countrywide. So the way that we look at it is there's kind of, putting it simplistic, three key pillars that we kind of base our foundation on of our analytics program. First one is visibility. So from there, we're really looking at, okay, there's a lot of data, but what data is required to gain those insights into really how the underlying network is performing? What makes sense, and how do I pull all that data together? Second is agility. As people build out, as more and more people have smartphones and come on to the, as you build out your VoLTE network, how do you build an analytics platform that can continue to grow with you so you're not starting from scratch? So, how do you scale? How do you continue to add capacity to an already, enormous amount of data? And then three is automation. If you get into within these VoLTE networks, they're complex. And so how do you manage that complexity? How do you push policy down to various nodes? How do you orchestrate certain things to, give priority, perhaps a voice call over a video call or vice versa? How do you inject that into the underlying network without touching each and every node? So these are some of the areas that we want to cover with you today and go a little bit deeper. So just to start off, we'll start off with the visibility, and we'll tackle that to a degree. So Chip, operators, they absolutely need to, continue to invest in visibility. We kind of have these different paradigms. Can you kind of walk us through, kind of what types of things that they would need to address as they start to, make the migration, whether it's on the VoLTE, the Wi-Fi, or the 5G new radio side?
Sure, Walter. Yeah, I think the key word obviously is visibility here, and having a single view of the network in terms of it rolling out VoLTE, and you're maybe relying on a particular vendor that helped you build out that solution. they may have also given you reporting capabilities along those lines. But that focus is probably more on, how the network elements are doing and, making sure the calls are coming up and so forth. But in reality, as Walter, as you were alluding to, it's a lot more complex than that. So it starts all the way to the left in terms of the number, of access technologies that are coming in. So obviously VoLTE is running over LTE. We have that viewpoint. In addition, with Wi-Fi, you're leveraging that EPC core to also, bring in data from homes and voice calls from homes there as well. And then even, in RCS and so forth, you're looking at, just running over the internet and kind of coming in, not necessarily with a full control of the end services. And then as we push out to 5G, you have, yet additional access technologies there. So, each of those areas certainly requires a certain amount of, core infrastructure, core packet infrastructure that's built out. So you'll want to have visibility, within, your access and core to be able to debug a lot of solutions that may end up evolving there, be it, coverage issues or maybe authentication issues in terms of just being able to get on the network from an access point at your home and so forth. But you need to build these out. So that dimensionality in terms of like when you have a call needs to be there. So, if we look further, deeper into the network, obviously we have the IMS core, which, VoLTE was built on top of. So, that's there, but maybe you want to actually spread your coverage to be able to understand, more in terms of what's going on at a hop by hop basis, right? What is SIP doing, across a number of the different network elements or functions or between functions. And as you roll out roaming and so forth, maybe you want to have better visibility there. So IMS itself, you may have, some initial visibility as you rolled out VoLTE, but you want to look deeper and have all the different combinations. Right. And finally, you're pulling this all together, in terms of bringing it into a platform. This is where I kind of envision this, Walter, as it's really, where with analytics, we're at the, the threshold of next generation NMSs, next generation OSSs, right? So the goal is really to bring in as much data as possible, but not just stockpiling data, so that you have it there in case you can kind of go mine gold some, day in the future. You really do want to build out that next generation capability where it's covering, that FCAPS type viewpoint that you come to rely on, for 20 years or whatever of running a services network. So, with analytics, it gives you that capability and gives you the flexibility where, you can bring in any attribute. You don't need to have, a full set of standardization and MIBs and all this other stuff. It's very flexible in that sense and gives you that level of visibility. And with that, now you can kind of slice and dice, an overused term, to, debug your network across all of these layers, be it IMS core, packet core, or the access technologies themselves.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, really having kind of that end-to-end visibility, from the access all the way back to the core to really troubleshoot those complex interactions, I think are just increasingly important. And if you don't have those viewpoints, if you're just trying to isolate down, you're really going to have difficulty in analyzing what is happening and being able to distinguish between maybe a network, application, or device type of issue that's associated with any type of poor subscriber experience. So, certainly that scalable, viewpoint across any size of an IMS network is going to be excessively important. So, we talk about that, but maybe we take it down a little layer deeper. There's all kinds of different data that I can get out, but, can you help walk through, like, from an analytics perspective, what does all that mean? Visibility and, what does visibility mean to Ribbon?
Yeah, so as we were kind of showing the slide earlier in terms of RAN, packet core, IMS core, and so forth. Obviously, there's a number of different protocols coming in, and a number of points along the network, as you're looking at the end-to-end calls and so forth. So, bringing in that data means that you're bringing in essentially event level view of calls that are going on. So, underlying that, you certainly want to pull out the, the dimensions and attributes, from those protocols, and within each of the protocols, and build out KPIs. So we're quite familiar with that, as an industry, of, building KPIs and then measuring your network in terms of SLA and operations against those KPIs. But I think one of the key things is really, combining all that data so that it's cross-correlated, right? So I want to be able to, look at, at a SIP call flow, understand, the call IDs and so forth, but then relate that or correlate that back to RTP in terms of what was happening on the packet side, and then within each of those areas, you may dig in deeper, but you may even look beyond that and say, okay, what's happening actually at my access or core network? So you want to dig a level down from there. So that heavy lifting of correlating across all of these protocols, is really the interesting part in order to be able to debug and give that visibility. Because while, you can see a failure happening at maybe a SIP or even an RTP level, as many have rolled out, media level QA visibility, it still doesn't actually answer all the questions. You really need to dig in deeper to a lot of the surrounding protocols, build out KPIs on those, and understand that, the performance as it relates.
Right. Yeah. And be able to, just have those holistic views, dashboards, and then, kick out the alerts to be able to really understand what's going on in the network. Because obviously from an alerting standpoint, not everybody's going to sit there and look at the screen 100% of the time. So you brought up an interesting concept around kind of maybe enrichment and KPI building out. What that says to me is like, wow, a lot of data, because I'll be able to pull in data from a lot of different sources. And, if you really kind of peel back the onion on these IMS networks and, everything that's going on, you can have a huge kind of data explosion just coming from your VoLTE network. So what is your view on the most efficient way of kind of handling, all these different data sources that you can gain visibility from?
Yeah, it's a good point, Walter. I think I've always looked at this as it's like the data arms race here, right? Where, we're looking to stockpile all this data, which I was saying before, but we don't use that. So, as we were, describing, the end-to-end VoLTE network and even, moving on to 5G voice, right? There are a number of components that sit there, along that path. So our viewpoint is really, you need to kind of take a pragmatic approach to this, right? Do I want to actually take all of that raw data and try and cross-correlate all of those pieces together, when you should be running a network that is, 95, 98% success, right, in terms of how it's running and performing. So then, therefore, you don't really need all of that data. So, we look to say, okay, well, we will provide data stitching capabilities, within a platform so that you can have, an access technology view, RAN, EUTRAN, and so forth, a core view. You can dig into maybe PM stats that are coming in from network elements or even like debug logs themselves, as well as, a number of the other systems in the network across diameter and policy architectures and so forth. So giving that level of visibility, but let's focus on, what's really important, which is, the failure scenarios, right? So that may mean that we need to have some context-sensitive filtering capabilities there, right? Let's only look at failures, for some of these, for lack of a better term, auxiliary data sources that are surrounding our core applications, right? So, with that, you're able to kind of move from, big data, stockpiling to an actual, next gen, network management system, right? Where you're actually using using and crafting an application and providing that capability. And then from there, you can kind of build in, intelligent triggers, right? In terms of being able to pull these data sources. So while we may be leaving some data on the table in terms of, say, only focus on failures or only focus in this area of the network, as a context-sensitive filtering, we may want to actually have triggers to grab more data, right? Whether it's, to look at a VIP customer or to debug a certain part of the network where we need to hone in, or even to do, machine learning modeling algorithms where at the end of the day, you need a balance of, success and failure in order to do, and craft certain models for prediction or description analysis. So I think all of those things kind of tie in to like how we efficiently manage all of these, protocols and cross-layer analysis.
Yeah, I think that's exceedingly important to really kind of take into a viewpoint, because you don't want to collect data just for data collection, as you're talking about, but if you kind of put it into a rationale of what is needed, failures versus maybe VIP, that you need successes and failures, is all very important. Because if you do get into a data explosion, which, ultimately I think even with a cross-layer analysis that you were talking about, you're still going to need to do some type of, build out and scale as you continue to grow your network. So that kind of leads us to our second pillar, which is agility. And so here we really want to kind of focus on, how do you build out, how do you scale the architecture? So, Chip, 10 years ago, there was an architecture from big data. Maybe you can kind of, give your, I know you're very much involved in, some of those different types of architectures, as well as moving us to our new future architectures. Maybe you can comment on maybe some of the limitations, what you saw, 10 years ago, and then we'll talk about what we're seeing today.
Sure. Yeah, I think, if we're looking back 10 years, maybe it seems like a long time, but, Hadoop and having the ability to, collect large volumes of data with, commodity hardware solutions and then be able to process that, it seemed like it was, within the grasp of anybody to, to implement that, right? So, there definitely were some projects and initiatives that occurred industry-wide where they said, okay, let's just build all of this out and grab all of this data and put it into a system, and then we'll kind of work on it there. But you had, what you were coming from prior to that was probably more, legacy data warehouses, RDBMS-based systems, or even kind of proprietary systems that were very siloed, and now you were trying to kind of pull all of that data together, in more of an ad hoc way, right? In a do-it-yourself analytics way. So I think while, we cut our teeth on, big data and analytics, I don't think we necessarily got all of the value out of, out of collecting all of that data. We probably got point solutions, but it wasn't necessarily a replacement for, what would traditionally be NMSs and OSSs and so forth, right? It was, probably an in-between stage of evolution, I would say.
Yeah, and what we're seeing right now is obviously, certainly where Ribbon is going is more cloud-based architectures today. So maybe you can throw a couple of comments on, architecturally, how do we see some of the advantages in moving forward for service providers?
Yeah. I mean, I think that industry-wide, obviously, the initiative is there in terms of moving to virtualized platforms, containerized-based solutions, and so forth. So I think cloud native is certainly, the most agile way of developing applications today, in terms of being able to, be fairly agnostic in terms of how your application runs and how it actually scales out. And what platforms it could even run on. that you need to embrace that first and foremost as a pillar, right? With that, you're able to, expose things like RESTful APIs so that programmatically, you can reach these functions, and then, you're delivering those services to a number of other applications. So you can pool that all together. So what that allows you to do, if you've kind of embraced that, is, you're somewhat independent on where you're deploying, right? Where you're deploying these solutions. As long as the data is there and available, you can roll that out. So now we can look towards, maybe even some of the concepts that are coming out in 3GPP, 5G core, where they're looking to build out analytics functions, right? But those analytics functions don't necessarily have to live centralized anymore, right? You can actually have a hierarchy of analytics functions and roll those out so that they're processing data in the right location. Let's not move all the data, into, a centralized data lake. Maybe we can do some processing on the edges of the network and actually run, these nimble cloud native Kubernetes-based applications on the edge of the network to either, gain insights there, or maybe even, enrich and cull down the data that's coming out on those edges, and then even push that into the central data lake, or use the data in place there. And with that, and you built all these pieces together, and you have these RESTful API interfaces. Now you actually have a much better route to be able to do centralized policy and control, right? So you can actually manage, maybe, even hierarchically and distributed, you can manage the entire network, with whatever your policies and procedures are. And then obviously bringing that all together, now you can build flexible applications that are actually addressing various needs, be it operational, application needs, which we're kind of highlighting today in terms of managing VoLTE service assurance and customer experience management, or even other areas where you're trying to take that same data that you've collected throughout your network and utilize it, be it to understand security issues that may be looming, or, or even monetizing it business to business, or, to your end subscribers.
Yeah, I think the cloud-based architectures, as you were saying, really give you that flexible options, either, putting the compute at the edge, or, in the cloud. So, and being able to bring out new different types of applications very quickly, as opposed to maybe, the monolithic approach 10 years ago, which were pretty much static. So as we kind of move forward, we talk about these different architectures. We talked about the visibility. So now we want to talk about, really managing that complexity, and how do we apply some level of automation back down into the network. So the way we kind of look at it from an automation standpoint is kind of like a couple of key concepts. We look at descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. So descriptive is kind of looking at, what has happened, what are those trending patterns, how do I take the data, how do I look for maybe anomalies or certain things that are happening in the network, so I can get a good assessment on, quality of service, quality of experience for my end subscribers. And so I want to give a viewpoint, kind of that executive level view. But then we also need to kind of continue to drill down and be more predictive in terms of how we're using that data. So if you think about it, how are we using maybe, different types of machine learning type of techniques to really look at areas that might become a particular problem in the future. We want to understand, what's going on in the core, and then leverage, machine learning for more automation of some of those workflows. And then, prescriptive is taking more of an action policy type of orchestration, and, being able to have more of a closed loop type of viewpoint across all of that. So, Chip, with those kind of, three 3 points. Is anything in particular that you want to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously I'm sure a number of folks on the call, have seen this kind of viewpoint in terms of descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, how you want to use data and kind of maybe transition from, just, slicing and dicing or analyzing the data based on, standard techniques, aggregations, and, building out KPIs and so forth, to really seeing how we can use that with, machine learning. How do we actually automate it? So, I think that's the main focus here. And I think, it's a phased approach, right? You can actually do descriptive analytics initially to gain insights, but maybe you actually haven't pulled that together to like, what do I do with that data? Or maybe you have a next best action in terms of like, when I see that data, introduce this human function into the loop, right? So you have a workflow, but there's a human involved in that. And I think the same would hold for, for predictive analytics as well, in terms of if we're, say, looking at network planning and looking at growth, right? So we are predicting how the network is going to grow, but then thereafter, we're not actually fully automating that we're going to, buy the expanded compute or storage and so forth, and actually build the network out. Not today anyway, right? There's a human involved. But I think these things will kind of move on to a level where we actually start to build out, in a kind of crawl, walk, run approach, moving from, a human being involved and making sure that these, the insights are correct that we're seeing, to actually fully automating it or semi-automating it, so that we're actually performing functions. And so I think that will evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think we probably can go through some use cases in terms of, how we do that.
Yeah, so why don't you walk us through some of these automation use cases, how we can help orchestrate network.
Yeah. So here, if we take that concept in terms of, descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics, we can take each one of these and kind of look at it with that lens, right? So user plane congestion management. I mean, this is something that's certainly, on the mobile side, it's, it's plagued operators, right? In terms of being able to manage the demand within the network, that may actually, come up, in an unplanned way, right? Maybe they actually have well-planned solutions along those lines as it relates to, stadiums and so forth, or high volume areas. But in other cases, they may not have planned for it. A traffic, a traffic accident on a highway, and everyone stopped there, and then they're all kind of using their phone at that point in time. So there are unplanned cases. So, with, congestion management, we could look at this as maybe, having a predictive analytics solution where, we've implemented the ability to predict what is end user, quality of experience on the network as it relates to the network conditions themselves, and then use that prediction in terms of that linkage between QoE and the network, to then decide, okay, when the network is being utilized at this level, or has these markers, what could we do about that? So an example might be, prioritizing voice calls over voice video calls, right? Because, we don't have enough bandwidth to deal with the voice and video calls and so forth. Maybe the same thing is, you're managing latency insensitive applications like email, and how that's being transmitted versus, latency sensitive type applications. And I think these types of techniques will continue to evolve even as we move to 5G, where they're looking at, slicing and ultra low latency type applications and so forth. So, and that's one area, taking that a little bit further in terms of managing the network, and being able to understand root causes. We want to automate that, right? We want to be able to predict what is the likely cause of a symptom that we're seeing in the network. So if we're having dropped calls or, failed call attempts and so forth, or maybe it's actually just really, poor media delivery, Each one of those, is a separate debug path that's actually quite involved. We went through the network earlier in terms of its complexity. So building out predictive use cases and solutions that actually pinpoint or at least provide the performance engineers and operational engineers some leads to go after in an automated fashion is a good starting point. And another example of more predictive analytics being used, and then the prescription is maybe manual today, and then later on it may be less manual. Maybe the manual today is tell this device manufacturer that they're actually having issues with registering on the network, right, with a new phone that they've released or a software upgrade that they've put out there, as an example. And then may move towards more automated ones where you're managing the congestion or the issues that are going on in the network. Bottom left, securing the network. This probably looks like more like a descriptive analytics case, right, where we're kind of looking at trends and seeing, patterns that are going on that may be more anomaly type patterns, right? So we're mining that data out and realizing, oh, maybe there could be, some fraud scenarios going on here in the network. We're seeing a high volume of calls coming from a certain country code or so forth into the network that we never see. We can take that intelligence and certainly mark it, understand it, and then even push an automated, say, firewall rule in terms of allowing a blacklist to be installed and so forth, and even tie other policies to that. The policies might be like, how long do we want to actually let this rule run before we take it away? So we give that level of visibility. And then, if you think about it with, on the bottom right with mobile edge computing and this kind of vision of bringing things towards the edge, it really pulls a lot of these other use cases together, right? So now we can start doing things on the edge of the network that we never thought of, right? Maybe, delivering video or augmented reality type use cases on the edge of the network, by essentially measuring all of these points, problems that are occurring, congestion that may be on the network and so forth, or even security level issues to, contain problems or manage problems locally in a focused sense, and enable that through maybe, spinning up new functions on the network, maybe, providing on-demand caching on the edge of the network or something along those lines. So these are some of the examples that we've kind of worked through with our customers over the years.
Yeah, great. Thank you for going through those use cases. I think that really highlights some of the automation that we can do within the product set. So, again, we at Ribbon, we kind of focus on these three key pillars of visibility, agility, and automation. Hopefully you got the audience online was able to kind of understand, some of the importance around some of these particular areas. But really what we wanted to do was kind of give you our recommendation. And so, as we look at it, Chip, maybe you can kind of take, how those three all really come together into a single solution for our end customers.
Yeah. Obviously, we've covered the three areas: visibility, agility, and automation. But if you break it down and look at it, the visibility certainly starts with data sources. So we've built out a solution platform that allows us to take in any data sources, right? Be it existing Ribbon equipment, equipment that you may have in your network that works along in concert with Ribbon, other data sources, probes, and so forth that are covering a lot of the key technologies that are driving your network, IoT, internet, 5G, and so forth. So we're able to bring and ingest all of those different data sources, automatically enrich that data, and then put it into, when we look into the middle of the slide here, put it into a platform that allows us to perform a number of functions on that. So that gives us the agility, right? So we're able to actually implement, these smaller applications that can support, incident analysis or being able to do certain machine learning algorithms, or even just building out customized KPIs, customized dashboard level visibility, and then supporting the automation of that. So, that's when we're looking towards the right side here, and being able to build out and enable a number of functions across policy, cost management, and so forth, and essentially close the loop back, right? So without, with all of these insights, but without actually tying an action to it, it's just wasted data and stranded knowledge, really. So, to automate that, we're able to actually, create some value out of that and optimize the network accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that recommendation. I know we're running close to the end of our time here. Leave a minute or two maybe for one or two questions possibly, but for the folks on the call right now, there is Collateral, both handouts and the GoToWebinar, but you can also go to our website. There's a number of different solution briefs and data sheets available to you, so you can find out more information on what we're doing here at Ribbon relative to analytics for your VoLTE environments, as well as your fixed network enterprise environments that we can share with you here today. So maybe, I know we're kind of at the top of the hour. Prasanna, maybe let's have maybe 1-2 questions and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so I've kind of picked a couple of questions from here to address here. I thought it might be good for you guys to reply to that. So question 1, how does this solution work with my existing tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably just covered that in the last slide in terms of the recommendations. I'm sure it was an earlier question here, but effectively, we've built an ETL process to be able to take in any data sources here, right? And by taking in any data sources, this includes, those that may be fairly complex that you've already invested in, right? So managing VoLTE means getting all of those KPIs and all of those underlying metrics to, to really fully build out the visibility. So we've built out, standard ETL processes that map that in so that you can then move that into the next phase of building a VoLTE service assurance application with varying sets of data.
Perfect. Anything to add there, Walter?
No, because I'm just trying to be, I think Chip summarized it, very effectively.
Perfect.
In terms of where we're going to go.
So the last question real quick is, can you highlight some strategies we must adopt to successfully automate our networks?
Yeah, I probably the whole like crawl, walk, run approach is best. Meaning, you need to actually start by getting visibility into the network, seeing the data and actually like using the data and, interactively. With that, you'll actually, gain the appreciation in terms of like the complexities that are there, and maybe even the understanding of aspects that you may want to automate in order to streamline, your workflows within your company. And I would say don't be too grand in what you want to do, right? Don't bite off too much in terms of the vision. You can start off on the smaller side. I think Ribbon's approach is we look to give applications that, provide, like 100 use cases out of the box of visibility and, give you some automation capabilities that aren't too complex and don't require a lot of care and feeding and on that side. And that actually gets you going and gives you some value. And then you can kind of build out from there.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach. We have a lot of automation tools built into the platform, the analytics platform, pass policy back down into the network. And that can be done on a very manual basis across your entire network. You could segment out certain slices of the network. You can get into more of an automated situation once you feel comfortable, when you're ready to quote run, to pass policy, maybe, fraud policies back down to the network to stop those fraudsters right at the edge, and or nuisance callers as well, which everybody's very focused on these days. So by, providing those types of mitigation capabilities, either, manual or automation, across the entire network or sections of the network, give you a lot of different flexibility to be able to handle that from an automation standpoint, and also being able to revert that back out. So let's say you have, neighborhood spoofing, on my cell phone, I see a certain number pop up and I think it's, somebody from my neighborhood. Well, maybe I want to block those types of calls because I know they're being spoofed for an hour or so. So the analytics platform will give you that type of flexibility. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done for right now. Prasanna, Lance, want to wrap us up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Walter. Thanks, Chip and Prasanna, for handling all that Q&A, and thank you to the audience for your attendance today. We really appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the poll. We will have a brief survey that's going to pop up here in just a minute when we close out today, so we'd also appreciate your participation with that survey. Look for an email later today, probably towards the end of the day, that'll have a link to the replay. It'll also have a link to the slides. So, and as usual, you can find out a lot more information as you see on the screen there at ribbоncommunications.com. You can reply to that email. We'd be happy to help you as well in case you think of another question down the road that you didn't get answered today. Feel free to respond to that email also. Again, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having another webinar down the road here shortly. Again, look for that pop up here in just a moment, and have a great rest of your day.